Following World Athletics' decision to reject multiple transfer applications involving Jamaican athletes, the focus has turned to fairness, opportunity, and athlete welfare. While the rules may be clear, the reality is more complex. Athletes caught between national loyalty and survival. And we're joined by Barrister-at-Law Andrew Okola, and he's going to break it down for us. Morning, Andrew. Welcome.
Morning, Andrew.
Hi. Morning, Delia. Morning, Debbie. Certainly good morning to your viewers. Thank you for having me.
World Athletics is arguing that it has a duty to protect the integrity of the sport, describing the applications as part of a coordinated recruitment strategy. Is that a reasonable basis for rejecting the transfers legally?
Well. Let's start with what is indeed correct. It is absolutely correct that World Athletics has a legitimate role in protecting the integrity of the international competitions. That is without saying. The basis upon which they have rejected these applications may yet be subject to legal challenge, because one would think that there's issue of fairness then comes to play, and fairness, just as a matter of course, can be challenged on many levels. It could be whether one wishes to raise the issue of restraint of trade, could be one wish to raise the issue of just procedural fairness, could be one wish to consider whether World Athletics took all relevant matters into consideration in coming up with a decision. It could be that World Athletics may have decided to give certain weight to certain matters in coming to its decision that ultimately makes it unfair. But I think the starting point, though, this decision being as it is today, the starting point from a Jamaican perspective is certainly to look at the situation that has brought us here. We're talking about Jamaicans, our athletes who certainly has a God-given right to the trade that they choose to practice. And here's a situation where 4 young athletes finds themselves in very sad and dire circumstances given these rules. So obviously, whilst we're not going to be, using this moment as a moment of triumphalism for either side, we have got to say, yes, World Athletics has a legitimate role to do what they ought to do. And now it turns to us, certainly as Jamaica and Jamaicans, to look to see how we can strengthen the system of support for our athletes so that they don't find themselves in a situation where they need to choose between loyalty to country and feeding their family.
Andrew, I'm listening and I'm struggling to find why would this compromise the integrity of the sport? It's
a bit different from one just getting unemployment elsewhere, because you're representing your country and there needs to be a certain sophistication and connectedness to your country. That's the ethos of the sports and that's the background of it. And as to whether these rules will stand the test of time is yet to be determined. Certainly as we speak, legal minds are mulling over the decisions, and I suspect in due course we'll file the necessary applications to review them.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, one of the things that was explicitly stated in the regulation is genuine connection. How is that assessed, though? Apart from the fact that this is a Jamaican trying to represent Turkey, is that the sole basis on which genuine connection is assessed?
No, genuine connection is never normal. It's a legal construct, and it's not just merely based on the fact that the Jamaicans were attempting to represent another country. I think what we would need to do first is to put what the new regulations do into perspectives, because there were always a regime in place that has to do with transfers. That regime was in place. In fact, the forerunner to and I will just call it for here, the March 2026 regime was from August 2022. 3 particular areas, probably 5, but 3 particular areas makes the new regulations a bit different. So one of the areas that is massively different, the number of transferred allowed. Now, the previous regime, there was no limits. So there would have been no limits. This regime is simply saying you can only get 10. So in other words, a country seeking out Jamaican interests has a limit as to how much they can get in terms of world athletics. For Jamaica, because there's another layer to it, then each federation you're only to get a maximum of 2 from each federation. So in other words, whereas before one could come and get a plethora of athletes from Jamaica, what we now have is that a particular country, so let's say Turkey, can now only get 2 from Jamaica, 1 male, 1 female, and then there's also changes in terms of the application as to when the applications can be made. Again, before, there were no limits. All that was required was reasonably practicable to do so. Now, the applications will only be allowed twice per year at a stated time as indicated by World Athletics. And the next part of the new regulations that then causes a little bit of change. Certainly, before, where you used to have the application be made to World Athletics, to the CEO or whomever, now there is a structure in place, it goes to Secretariat. But what you do find is, yes, the new regulations, and I will just say the new regime in place, has certainly narrowed the gap. And so, therefore, if only 2 persons, 1 male, 1 female, are eligible from Jamaica to any particular country then seeking to get those 2 athletes, then you see what it means, certainly for the areas of the sport, or the areas of athletics that are not best served in terms of our athletes getting being open up for sponsorship and for the support. What you might very well see is that people might take an interest more in your sprints, but once they have selected one person from sprint, another person from another category, then it's pretty much shut out. And those are the new regime, or features of the new regime that's a bit different from previous regime. Yeah. Previous regime, it was pretty much a free-for-all, as it were. But now there's massive restriction, and these restrictions has massive implications. There are good sides to it, naturally, and there are downsides to it, because you can see world athletics, let's say they're possibly being concerned with a situation where smaller federation might find themselves simply at the fancy and behest of far more powerful and wealthy federation, and their best talents might be snatched. If World Federation is saying, well, we're in to protect this, then the question then is, does these rules, not on the face of them, appears to be too restrictive for the coaching that it seeks possibly to prevent? But again, all of this is matters, I'm sure, that will come out in the wash once the legal challenges that are subject to be taken will be done. I think the more important, but just one point, I think the more important, though, is that what we really should be framing the discussion, certainly at home and in Jamaica, is not necessarily on the restriction, as it were, at this point in time, but what support mechanism or systems are in place that can proportionately provide an answer to these situations, so that our athletes are not certainly induced by a bigger payday next place, but they are in a position where they can enjoy the sport that they love and find themselves where there's an ecosystem within the supporting structures in Jamaica that can facilitate them, so they won't need to look elsewhere. So
that's one of the things I was saying. I think for World Athletics to make these kinds of decisions without ensuring that there is some equity across the federations is a challenge for me. But what would stop me from getting up tomorrow and saying, okay, I'm moving to Turkey. I'm now a citizen there. And so I want to represent them.
Well, as the rules, nothing could stop you from physically moving there and said you want to represent them. But as the rules are, right, and this is we're in a rules-based regime. The rules require that you have to sit out a particular period, could be up to 3 years, and during that period, there's a neutrality, and there's a neutrality that's enforced at that point in time, because you can't represent your home country and you're not able to represent the country that you're now a citizen of.
Right.
And again, even though there is within the structure a safeguard, as it were, and exceptional circumstances can, in some situation, cause the waiting period to be less than 3 years. The fact is, if you're in Jamaica, an athlete, and you're leaving tomorrow for Turkey or anywhere else, by this application being made, then you have to go through the process, and there's a waiting period.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. We got to go.
Yeah.
I think it requires a lot more discussion. I mean, we've lost.
It does.
It does.
But at the end of the day, certainly we want rules that protect Jamaica's pride and integrity in the sports, no doubt about this.
Yeah.
But again, we've got to make sure that these rules are proportionate so that family not left out.
All right, Barrister-at-Law, Andrew Kohler.
Yeah.
We gotta go, athletes.
Oh, yeah, the journeyman. All right, guys. Well, coming up next, Family Matters, the legal side. We have that discussion after this.